It's spooky season, everybody. So, for the month of October, I'd like to welcome you to the. The Cloverfield trilogy is a sci fi horror ish trilogy of films. It's an anthology series, which means none of them are connected, but they're in the same universe. Kinda. Look, the only consistent thing in this series is the lack of consistency. But we'll get into that later. Right now, let me establish what we're all doing here. We're going to go through a rundown of each movie, summarizing the broad strokes, before analyzing what worked and what didn't. Then at the end, we can spin the block for a bird's eye view, analyzing the series holistically. And we'll see if we can learn something about this trilogy, about horror, and maybe even about movies in general if we manage to get meta enough. Let's find out! The first movie is cut into two pieces of found footage. The first covers a day date, while the second covers a night terror. We're going to focus on the night terror for this video since it's the meat of the movie. Said night terror begins as most bad nights do, with a surprise party. And here we're introduced to our ragtag gang of misfits. Rob is our main hero, Beth is Rob's love interest, their relationship is complicated, Lily is Rob's friend, Marlena is Lily's friend, and HUD is our present cameraman and future bomb threat issuer. The movie starts with Rob basically scaring Beth out of the party because of his insecurities. Then an explosion knocks out the city's power. Our heroes evacuate with everybody else, cause why wouldn't they? Crossing the Brooklyn Bridge to get out of town. Rob gets a call that he can't hear cause it's loud. Jason, who's been separated from the group, gets crushed when a giant arm smacks the bridge. Oh, you're probably wondering who Jason is, huh? Well, he's Rob's brother. I forgot to introduce him earlier, but don't worry, Rob also forgets about him almost instantly. After the bridge gets whacked, Rob gets a voicemail from Beth. Oh no, she's trapped in her apartment and needs help. So Rob decides to go save her and everyone else goes with him, cause why wouldn't they? This involves running through a showdown between the army and the monster and ending up trapped in the subway due to the madness going on in the streets. Rob tells his mom that he's now her healthiest son, then our squad decides to walk the tracks to reach Beth. In doing so, they piss off the new residents of the subway, who turn out to be horrifying dog alien things. One alien bites Marlena after she rescues HUD, who might not have needed rescuing if he decided to fight with two hands instead of saving one for his camera. Our gang then escapes to the surface and reaches a military station. Marlena literally explodes, so the others head on to Beth's apartment, which is thankfully on the 7,000th floor of a skyscraper. Our heroes head up the tower, find a still alive Beth, then rip a 5,000-foot piece of metal out of her. Beth then proceeds to climb down 4,000 stories, then sprint fast enough to outpace HUD. Granted, at this point, HUD is only like 10% human, with the other 90% being camera. Our gang get into two choppers. Lily gets her own because she's a diva, while the rest are regulated to chopper number 2. But it shouldn't matter, the monster's land-based, so it's not like everyone dies in the crash except HUD, Rob, and Beth. No one of importance dies in the crash. While the gang's hanging out, a 10,000-foot monster somehow sneaks up on them, then eats HUD. Rob and Beth take shelter under a bridge, giving their last will and testament. Then the army blows up the bridge, the park, and our beloved monster. The movie ends with a clip from the day date. We see something fall from the sky into the water, then it's over. So, despite my snark, I really like Cloverfield. I wouldn't call it scary because to me, scary is defined more by being unsettled. I describe the vibe of this movie as tense. There are heart-pounding scenes that'll have you on the edge of your seat. The effects are a little rough, but mostly hold up. Especially for our dear Clover, who looks good as new, even though this movie is 16 years old. The cast is well defined enough that I'm not rooting for them to die. The film leans a lot on the introductory party to keep you invested, so if you're not paying attention then, you're in for a ride. But I don't think it's hard to focus. If found footage isn't your thing, I totally get it, but I think the style services this movie pretty well. It makes the action that much more engaging and real. It straddles the line between amateur and professional in a way that usually works. However, the word usually is carrying a lot of weight in that sentence. You may have caught on in my summary that HUD feels a little too good at camera work at times. I understand the need to get shots, because it is a movie, but there are points where it feels like HUD is more interested in cool shots than staying alive. Which I mean, go off King, same. Another criticism I have is that the characters sometimes feel a little too jokey. Humor and tension are generally negatively correlated, and this movie steers a little too far into the realm of jokey jokes for my taste. Having these characters crack wise makes me less afraid for them and a little less involved in the movie. There's a time and place for jokes, and this ain't it, Chief.
Wait, you know who Superman is?
Oh my god, whoa. You know who Superman is?
Okay,
Whoa, I'm like feeling something. Are you aware of Garfield?
Also, these guys cannot go 6 feet without bumping into the monster. It follows them around New York like a lost puppy. That's a nitpick for sure, but I thought I'd toss it in since it was noteworthy. Honestly, I'm curious as to how someone who lived in New York in the early 2000s received this, because the movie is very evocative of 9/11. The people running from the dust cloud, the buildings collapsing, the aesthetics of powerlessness, there are clear indicators of real life influencing art here. And speaking of real life, I find the origins of this movie to be almost as interesting as the movie itself. J.J. Abrams got his idea for the monster in Japan. He said, and I quote, "We need our own American monster, and not like King Kong. King Kong is adorable, and Godzilla is a charming monster. We love Godzilla, but I wanted something that was just insane and intense." On a meta level, I find it intriguing how much more brutally, senselessly violent the American kaiju is in comparison to Godzilla's semi-heroic status. Maybe there's something to be said there about how the difference in culture affects how we create these entities. On creation, the origins of the monster aren't actually explored in this film. They're explored in a tie-in comic instead. Yuck. Apparently the monster originates from Earth and was living deep in the ocean. A shady company sent submarines, to go investigate the creature, which woke it up. Then it went on a rampage, mostly because it's a baby and doesn't really know how to act. You know how babies are. Wait, you're saying now, because you're an astute media consumer. Then what fell from the sky at the end of the movie? Well, it was a satellite belonging to the shady company. Maybe, or maybe not. J.J. Abrams admitted that he didn't know what he wanted to do with it. It's another of his infamous mystery boxes. And boy oh boy, just you wait, cause we're gonna see a bunch more of those. The second movie in our trilogy begins with our protagonist, Michelle, leaving her husband. She drives into the night to escape him, only to get got by a random truck that knocks her straight into the movie's plot. Michelle awakens in a bunker, and we meet the other two members of our cast. Emmett is a country yokel with a broken arm, whereas Howard is a conspiracy nut who engineered the bunker due to his own paranoia. Howard believes that a bioweapon has been released, and that America is under attack by an unknown force that poisoned the air outside the bunker. Emmett believes Howard, claiming that he saw the attack firsthand. Michelle, believing a grand total of neither of these two strangers she just met, immediately tries to escape. She's immediately stopped though when a lady tries to break in. Upon seeing how nasty the would-be intruder looks, Michelle decides that maybe quarantining isn't so bad after all. Howard decides that this is the best time to admit that he was the one driving the truck that gave Michelle a healthy dose of CTE. He claims that it was an accident though, as he was rushing home after realizing the world was ending. Michelle doesn't have much of a choice, so she decides to trust him, especially after she hears him open up about his super dead daughter. And sees him twerking.
Ooh la la.
Later, the imposter sabotages ventilation, so Michelle goes to fix it. Upon doing so, though, she discovers evidence that the bunker had a guest who was clearly there unwillingly. Michelle confers with Emmett, who realizes that a picture Howard showed Michelle earlier isn't actually Howard's daughter, but is instead a girl who went missing and was never found. So, our dynamic duo decide to break out. They build a makeshift hazmat suit, planning to overpower their captor, but uh-oh, Howard finds them out. Luckily, he's a merciful tyrant and... Yikes. Michelle starts a fire, puts on the hazmat suit, and dips, maiming Howard in the process and escaping into the outside world. She then realizes two things. One, the air isn't contaminated, and two, this movie has Cloverfield in its title, meaning aliens. Luckily, this isn't Michelle's first rodeo with extraterrestrials, so she one-shots them. Then she drives off again, just like at the start of the movie. But when faced with the decision of driving away from the conflict or going toward it, she chooses to fight. 10 Cloverfield Lane is interesting. I think this movie is superior to the first in almost every way, but I'm of two minds. Or rather, inside me are two wolves. One of them likes the ending as a slick sci-fi fight, and the other thinks it clashes too harshly with the rest of the movie. Both agree that the aliens are the weakest part of this film, because the strongest is obviously the bunker. The tension in some of these scenes is razor sharp. John Goodman? More like John Badman, because he's such an intimidating and unpredictable presence here. Mary Elizabeth Winstead and John Gallagher Jr. bring a level of desperate skittishness and down-home charmy oafishness that are really engaging. Seeing these characters bounce off each other in such tight spaces had me more on the edge of my seat than anything in the prior movie. Which is why the ending feels so out of touch. To get meta, this movie was originally pitched as a script called The Cellar, and it was solely focused on the bunker and its inhabitants. But over time, the script was transmogrified into what J.J. Abrams called a blood relative to Cloverfield. And that's pretty obviously why the ending is such a shift. Something that should have been its own thing was absorbed into this greater franchise when it didn't need to be. An idea was misshapen to match what is with what was. And it didn't even match! The aliens in this movie have zero relation to our beloved kaiju. They don't even look alike.
She doesn't even go here!
This ending would have been better if they actually committed to this movie being in the same universe. And speaking of universes, let's hit up our third installment. Cloverfield Cubed follows Hamilton, a science lady, and the rest of the crew on a space station that houses a particle accelerator. In this world, there's an energy crisis that's gonna put everyone 6 feet under, so the space station, called the Cloverfield Space Station, is everyone's last hope. But conspiracy theorists are afraid that charging up the particle accelerator will cause the Cloverfield paradox to occur, which would mean universes overlapping and all hell breaking loose. But that probably won't happen. We'll be fine. After 2 years of trying, the team gets the accelerator to work. But oh no, the Earth has vanished, and the gyroscope the station uses to navigate is gone too. Also, there's an unknown woman stuffed into the wall. Wait, what? This guy's eyeballs start going sicko mode. He talks to himself in the mirror, 3D prints a gun, then threatens some crewmates before collapsing. Then worms explode out of him. They were apparently there since the power surge, which has to have been a few minutes at least, so I don't know how this guy didn't just instantly die. Anyway, Brienne of Tarth tells Hamilton not to trust Baron Zemo, because he's a spy sent by the Germans to make sure Russia burns to the ground before Cloverfield Station unlocks infinite power. The station's captain then puts Zemo in the closest thing they have to a brig, but an unexplained force frees him almost immediately. The guy from Bridesmaids gets his arm sucked into a wall before it gets sucked clean off. Turns out the arm is just hanging out though, so the crew trap it, give it a pen so it can write something, and it directs them to cut open the worm guy. They do, and oh hey, it's the gyroscope.
What?
Don't know how that guy didn't just instantly die if this thing was inside him the whole time, but whatever. The crew find the Earth on the other side of the sun, then realize they're in a different universe. They decide to fire the ship again to go back home, because science. This lady goes into a room which floods, then explodes for reasons unknown. Then Mr. Bridesmaids gets a little too friendly with magnetized metal and also explodes. The captain then sacrifices himself to detach a part of the ship that would have ripped the whole thing apart. Hamilton realizes that while in the other universe she got her kids killed, in this universe, they're alive. So she plans to go to Earth and be a sister wife to her husband and second mom to her parallel kids. But Brienne wants the ship for her universe since her own was destroyed, so she comes up with a dastardly plan. First, she steals a gun from a box she had no idea even existed. Second, she gutshots this guy, killing him. Third, she gutshots Zemo, then shoulder pops him. But unlike the other guy, Zemo isn't weak to bullets, so he whacks her with a wrench, giving Hamilton time to run. A final showdown occurs. On one side we have Brienne of Tarth, a good half a foot taller than her opponent and armed with a gun. And on the other side, we have Hamilton. Guess who wins? Once Brienne is spaced, Hamilton and a bulletproof Zemo fire up the station to reach their universe before heading home. Which, I mean, I'm glad things worked out. This movie is cheeks. Easily the worst in the franchise. The Cloverfield Paradox is a film where things just happen. It's like it was made by someone who couldn't complete a full thought before moving on to the next. I'm shocked by how incompetently this is written. There's a plotline I skipped over completely where Hamilton's husband is on Earth. He finds a girl and they hide in a bunker. And that's it. That's their story. Tonally, this movie is all over the place. It can't decide whether it wants to be scary spooky or jokey jokey in the worst way. Remember when that guy explodes worms? Well, here's his crewmate's response.
Well, we found the worms.
These two have known each other for at least 2 years. And right after one dies, the other makes a joke that isn't even funny. He might as well have said, "Well, that just happened." It's so frustrating and immersion breaking when characters in tense situations cannot take their world seriously. Because if they don't, why should we? Speaking of worlds, like with 10 Cloverfield Lane, this movie started out as a script unrelated to the Cloverfield franchise, and was originally called The God Particle. But J.J. Abrams basically said, close enough, and this movie's fate was sealed. The inclusion of alien elements in this was even worse than in the last one. And for what? It adds nothing. Nothing! That brings me to the holistic portion of this video, because when you aggregate these movies, you realize that they follow an all too familiar arc. Cloverfield was an idea, a flawed one, but a concept that I think was executed fairly well. But it wasn't allowed to be itself, because there's money to be made in brand recognition. So the seller was injected with alien DNA to make audiences remember that other thing they liked, because new intellectual properties are hard to market. Then the God Particle was injected with alien DNA for the exact same reason. The cycle isn't just in the last 2 movies, it's now retroactively affected the first. Because at the end of the day, this series isn't about trying something new. It's about cannibalizing ideas, then tweaking them to fit the brand. And let me say as a counterpoint, I don't think the first movie fits this bill. Yes, Cloverfield is a kaiju film, but I think it's unique enough that it stands on its own. But the rest of the franchise clearly had interesting concepts that were morphed by Abrams and his team and made worse for it. But as a second counterpoint, would these scripts have been filmed without the power of Abrams and brand name of Cloverfield? Maybe not for a long time, maybe not ever. But were they made better by the elements added? Certainly not. Not at all, I'd say. Whether that trade-off is worth it is up to you. In a way, the actual horror of Cloverfield isn't its monsters.
Hello there.
It's the entity that is the industry. It's this vampiric creature that siphons creativity from writers and twists their creations into an image more unto its liking. In other words, the true horror of Cloverfield isn't anything we see on screen. It's the thing behind it. That's all for this one. Like and subscribe because I've got essays, movie rewrites, franchise fixes, and whatnot in the works. And until the next one, stay spooky.